Barnaby Barney Crumb sat near the dusty window of Oakhaven Academy's history room, scribbling furiously in his binder as he tried to follow Mr. Abernathy's lecture on ancient civilizations. His mismatched socks peeked out from under his worn jeans, and he nervously chewed on the end of his pen, a habit he'd picked up from his grandfather. At 16, Barney was the type of boy who faded into the woodwork, short, a bit chubby, with a mop of ginger hair that defied all attempts at styling. The room droned with the usual hum of fourth-period history, but Barney stayed fixed on his notes. His family had moved from Maine to this sleepy Vermont town a month ago, and he was still getting used to the new school. Back home, he'd been part of the drama club, had a group of friends who shared his love for old movies, a place where he fit in. Here, he was an outsider, just another face in the crowd, unnoticed and easily forgotten. "Yo, Carrot Top!" The harsh voice shattered his focus. Barney glanced up to see Rex the Wrecker Wilkinson looming over his desk, surrounded by his usual crew. Rex was everything Barney wasn't, towering, muscular, with a perfectly sculpted buzz cut and the kind of arrogant sneer that came from always getting his way. As the captain of the football team and the son of the town's wealthiest banker, Rex ruled Oakhaven's social scene with an iron fist. "I'm talking to you, dweeb," Rex pressed, his voice booming loud enough to make heads turn. His buddies, Butch McAllister and Spike O'Malley, cackled behind him like devoted sidekicks eager for attention. Barney felt his face flush as other students glanced over. "Sorry, did you need something?" he stammered, hoping to avoid a confrontation. "What I need," Rex spat, bending closer, "is for you to stop breathing my air. You're contaminating it." Butch snorted with laughter, as if it were the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Mr. Abernathy, the history teacher, was busy writing on the chalkboard and seemed unaware of the trouble brewing in the back. Barney had quickly learned that the teachers at Oakhaven had a knack for ignoring Rex's antics. "I wasn't," Barney began, but Rex cut him off. "Wasn't what? Existing? Because you definitely are, and it's offensive." Rex snatched Barney's pen from his hand and snapped it in two. The pieces clattered onto the desk, and Barney flinched, his cheeks burning with shame. When he looked up, the three bullies were already swaggering away, Rex calling back over his shoulder, "Try to keep a low profile, Maynard." The rest of the class period passed in a haze of humiliation and anger. Barney kept his eyes down, acutely aware of the snickers and stares from his classmates. This wasn't the first time he'd been targeted since arriving at Oakhaven, and he had a bad feeling it wouldn't be the last. What none of them knew, what Barney had never told anyone at his new school, was that he came from a long line of hedge witches, practitioners of folk magic who possessed abilities that most people would dismiss as nonsense. His grandmother had spent years teaching him the old ways, the secret knowledge passed down through generations of his family. She'd cautioned him about using his gifts irresponsibly, about the consequences of meddling with unseen forces. "With great power comes great responsibility, my dear," she'd always said. "Never use what you've been given to cause harm, only to help and protect." But as Barney shuffled through Oakhaven's crowded hallways after history class, his grandmother's words felt distant and meaningless. All around him, students laughed and chatted in groups while he navigated the social minefield alone, invisible except when Rex and his cronies decided to make him their punching bag. The lunchroom was always the worst part of Barney's day. The cavernous room echoed with the cacophony of voices, the clanging of trays, and the occasional shout from across the room. Barney had learned to time his entrance carefully. Too early, and he'd be alone at a table like a sitting duck. Too late, and all the safe spots would be taken. He grabbed a tray and trudged through the lunch line, selecting a soggy grilled cheese sandwich and a bruised apple before scanning the room for a place to sit. The popular kids dominated the center tables, with Rex's gang holding court at the largest one. Barney had learned to avoid that entire area, but even sitting along the edges didn't guarantee safety. He'd just settled into a small table near the back wall when he sensed a presence behind him. "Well, well, look who's eating by himself again." Rex's voice was unmistakable. Barney stiffened, his grip tightening on his sandwich. "Maybe he's waiting for his imaginary friends," Butch snickered. "Or maybe," Spike chimed in, "he's too weird for anyone to want to sit with him." Barney kept eating, trying to block them out, but Rex wasn't finished. He sauntered around to face Barney, his expression mockingly sympathetic. "You know what your problem is, Maynard? You're a nobody. You sit there like a ghost, never talk to anyone, never do anything interesting. It's pathetic, really." "I'm just trying to eat lunch," Barney mumbled, not looking up from his tray. "Just trying to eat lunch," Rex mimicked in a high-pitched, mocking voice. "God, even your voice is boring. Do you ever get excited about anything? Do you even have a pulse?" The lunchroom around them had grown quieter, other students sensing drama and turning to watch. Barney felt the familiar heat of embarrassment creeping up his neck, but something else was stirring inside him too. A strange buzzing sensation he'd felt before, usually when his emotions were running high. Rex must have noticed Barney's discomfort because his grin widened. "Oh, look at that. I think Carrot Top is getting upset. Are you going to cry? Are you going to run to Grandma?" The buzzing sensation grew stronger, and Barney found himself thinking of his grandmother's lessons about energy, about the interconnectedness of all things, about how strong emotions could amplify magical abilities. He pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on his breathing, on staying calm. "Leave me alone," Barney said, his voice barely audible. "What was that?" Rex leaned closer, cupping his ear dramatically. "I didn't hear you, Maynard." "I said leave me alone," Barney repeated, slightly louder this time. Rex straightened up, laughing. "There we go. The ghost can speak." He turned to his buddies. "Did you guys hear that? He actually has a voice." Just then, Ms. Crabtree, one of the lunch monitors, approached their table. "Everything okay here, boys?" Rex instantly switched on his charm, flashing his perfect smile. "Oh yeah, Ms. Crabtree, everything's great. We were just chatting with Barney here, trying to help him feel welcome. You know how tough it can be for new kids." Ms. Crabtree looked between Rex and Barney, clearly sensing tension, but having no proof of wrongdoing. "Well, that's nice of you, Rex. Barney, how are you settling in?" "Fine," Barney managed, knowing that saying anything else would only make things worse for him later. "Good, good," Ms. Crabtree nodded. "Well, you boys finish up your lunch. The bell's going to ring soon." As soon as the monitor moved away, Rex's friendly mask dropped. "Smart move, keeping your mouth shut," he hissed, so only Barney could hear. "Wouldn't want to cause any trouble during your first month, would you?" The rest of lunch passed without incident, but Barney could feel Rex's eyes on him from across the lunchroom. He'd made an enemy, he realized. Though he wasn't entirely sure how or why, all he'd wanted was to survive high school quietly, graduate, and move on with his life. But Rex seemed determined to make that impossible. Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. Rex and his goons would accidentally knock into Barney in the hallways, sending his books scattering across the floor. They'd make fun of his clothes, his hair, his accent whenever teachers were nearby, comments disguised as friendly teasing that adults dismissed as harmless teenage pranks. In gym class, Barney found himself consistently picked last for teams, often ending up on Rex's side, where he'd be ignored during games or deliberately set up to fail. During group projects in various classes, he'd be the odd man out, forced to work alone while other students paired off with friends. The worst part wasn't the direct confrontations, it was the isolation. Barney began to understand how Rex's influence permeated the school. Other students weren't necessarily mean to him, but they weren't friendly either. It was as if Rex had marked him as untouchable, and everyone else was smart enough to keep their distance. Barney tried calling his grandmother back in Maine, hoping for guidance, but she only repeated her usual warnings about using his abilities responsibly. "Patience, dear," she'd said during their last conversation. "Sometimes the universe tests us to see what we're made of. Remember, true strength isn't about what you can do to others. It's about who you choose to be when no one is watching." But patience was becoming harder to maintain, especially as Rex seemed to grow bolder with each passing day. During fifth period English, Rex would whisper insults just loud enough for Barney to hear, but quiet enough that Mr. Henderson wouldn't notice. In the hallways between classes, Rex's buddies would form a wall, forcing Barney to squeeze past them or take longer routes to his destinations. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon in late November. Barney had stayed after school to work on a science project in the lab, hoping to avoid the usual crush of students at dismissal. The school was almost empty, except for a few teachers and students involved in after-school activities. He was gathering his things when Rex, Butch, and Spike appeared in the doorway of the science lab. Barney's stomach sank. He was alone, and there were no teachers around to help. "Well, well," Rex said, strolling into the lab with his hands in his pockets. "Look what we have here, all alone and nowhere to hide." Barney continued packing his backpack, trying to appear calm even though his heart was pounding. "I'm just leaving," he said quietly. "I'll be out of your way in a minute." "Oh, you're not in our way," Rex replied, his voice deceptively friendly. "Actually, we've been looking for you. We have a little proposal." Butch and Spike spread out slightly, blocking the lab's exits. Barney realized he was cornered. "See, the thing is," Rex continued, walking closer, "you've been at Oakhaven for a while now, and you still don't seem to get how things work around here. There's a pecking order, and everyone has their place." "I'm not looking for trouble," Barney said, finally turning to face them. "But trouble found you anyway," Spike chuckled. Rex nodded. "Spike's right. The problem is, you don't know your place yet, and that makes things awkward for everyone." "What do you want?" Barney asked, though he dreaded the answer. Rex's grin widened. "What do I want? I want you to understand that this is my school. These are my friends, my teachers, my territory, and when someone new comes in and doesn't show proper respect..." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he nodded to Butch, who pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is going to be epic," Butch said, adjusting the angle of his camera. Barney felt a shiver run down his spine. "What are you doing?" "Making a little movie," Rex explained. "Something to help you remember this conversation. Don't worry, we'll make sure everyone at school gets to see it." Before Barney could react, Spike grabbed his arms from behind, pinning them to his sides. Barney struggled, but Spike was bigger and stronger, and the surprise had given him the upper hand. "Let me go," Barney yelled, but Rex just laughed. "In a minute. First, we need to give you a little makeover." Rex reached into his backpack and pulled out a pair of hair clippers. "See, I've been thinking about your look, and I realized what the problem is. That ginger mop makes you look like a clown. Too goofy. We need to tone you down a bit." Barney's eyes widened in terror as he realized what Rex intended to do. "No, please don't." "Hold him still," Rex ordered Spike, who tightened his grip on Barney's arms. The buzzing of the hair clippers filled the science lab as Rex switched them on. "This is going to look so hilarious on social media," he said, approaching Barney with the device. "Everyone's going to love seeing the new kid's new do." Barney fought desperately, but Spike's grip was too strong. He felt the cold metal of the clippers against his scalp as Rex began shaving off his hair, the ginger strands falling to the floor in clumps. "Perfect!" Rex exclaimed, stepping back to admire his handiwork. "Much better. Now for the rest." As the clippers approached his head again, something inside Barney snapped. The buzzing sensation he'd felt before returned, but this time it was different. Stronger, more focused. His grandmother's lessons flooded back to him, not the warnings about restraint, but the older knowledge, the power that flowed in his veins. "Stop," Barney said, and his voice carried a strange resonance that made Rex pause. "Or what?" Rex challenged, but there was something uncertain in his expression now. Barney looked straight at Rex, and for the first time since arriving at Oakhaven, he didn't look away. His hazel eyes seemed to glow with an inner light, and the temperature in the lab dropped several degrees. "You have no idea what you've just done," Barney said softly, his voice carrying that same strange resonance. Rex laughed, but it sounded forced. "What? Are you going to cast a spell on me? Are you some kind of wizard?" "Hedge witch," Barney corrected, and as he spoke the words, he felt power surge through him like electricity. "And you're about to find out what that means." He focused his energy, remembering his grandmother's teachings about the connections between all living things, about how hair held a person's essence, about how someone who knew the old ways could use that connection for healing or for other purposes. Rex raised the clippers again, but as he did, Barney spoke in a language none of them recognized. Words his grandmother had taught him, ancient phrases passed down through generations of his family. The air in the lab seemed to shimmer with energy. "What the heck is he doing?" Spike asked nervously, his grip on Barney's arms loosening slightly. Rex tried to brush it off, but his hand was shaking now. "He's just trying to scare us. It's some kind of weird new kid stunt." But as Barney continued speaking, something odd began to happen. Rex's perfectly sculpted buzz cut started to fall out in clumps, just like Barney's hair had moments before. At first, Rex didn't notice, too focused on maintaining his tough image, but Butch's horrified expression made him look down. "Dude," Butch whispered, his phone still recording, "your hair." Rex reached up to touch his head and came away with a handful of buzz-cut hairs. His eyes widened in shock and panic as more hair began falling, creating a small pile at his feet. "What did you do to me?" Rex screamed, dropping the clippers as he desperately tried to catch the falling hair. Barney's voice grew stronger, the ancient words flowing from him with increasing power. Spike released his grip, stumbling backward in fear as he watched Rex's hair continue to fall out in increasing amounts. "Make it stop," Rex pleaded, but Barney wasn't finished. He turned his gaze to Butch, who was still holding his phone with trembling hands. "You wanted to record this?" Barney asked, his voice carrying that otherworldly resonance. "Make sure you get it all." Butch's dark hair began falling out next, starting slowly but quickly accelerating. The phone slipped from his shaking fingers, clattering to the floor as he joined Rex in frantically trying to catch the falling strands. Spike, seeing what was happening to his friends, turned to run, but Barney's gaze found him before he could reach the door. "Where are you going?" Barney asked calmly. "The show's not over yet." Spike's brown hair started falling out in clumps, and he collapsed to his knees, sobbing as he watched himself going bald in real time. Within minutes, all three boys were completely hairless, not just on their heads, but their eyebrows and any other visible hair had vanished as well. They huddled together on the floor of the science lab, looking like frightened, hairless animals as they stared up at Barney in terror. Barney picked up Butch's phone from the floor, noting that it had recorded everything. He stopped the recording and looked down at the three boys who had tormented him for weeks. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice returning to normal but carrying an unmistakable authority. "You're going to leave me alone from now on. You're not going to bother me, talk to me, or even look at me unless absolutely necessary. You're going to tell everyone at school that this was some kind of accident. Maybe you tried to prank each other and it went wrong. But you're never ever going to tell anyone what really happened in this room." Rex tried to speak, but only a choked whimper came out. "And if you do," Barney continued, "if you tell anyone about this, if you try to get revenge, if you so much as think about bothering me again, what happened to your hair will seem like a fond memory compared to what I'll do next time." He held up the phone. "This video is going to stay with me as insurance. It shows exactly what you did to me and what happened afterward. If anyone asks, You can tell them you were just trying to help me with a science experiment and something went wrong." Barney gathered his things and walked toward the door, pausing to look back at the three bald boys huddled on the floor. "Oh, and Rex," he said softly. "My grandmother always taught me that hair grows back, usually within a few months, but that depends on whether the person has learned their lesson or not. I guess we'll see, won't we?" He left them there in the science lab, bald and terrified, and walked out into the hallway with his head held high for the first time since arriving at Oakhaven. News of the hair-raising incident spread through the school like wildfire over the weekend. By Monday morning, everyone had heard some version of the story. The official version, told by Rex and his buddies, was that they'd been messing around with some kind of chemical solution for a prank when something went wrong and caused their hair to fall out. They claimed it was just bad luck, a dumb accident that they regretted. But there were whispers of other stories, rumors that someone had cursed them, that the new kid had somehow been involved, that there was more to the story than anyone was saying. Barney walked through the hallways that Monday morning to a very different reaction than he'd become accustomed to. Students stepped out of his way, not out of fear exactly, but out of respect. There were curious glances and hushed conversations, but no one bothered him. Rex, Butch, and Spike were nowhere to be seen for the first few days. When they finally returned to school, they wore beanies pulled low over their heads and avoided eye contact with everyone, especially Barney. Their behavior had changed completely. The swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous energy and a tendency to speak in hushed tones. Other students began approaching Barney cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they realized he was nothing like the rumors suggested. He was quiet, yes, but also smart, funny when he wanted to be, and surprisingly knowledgeable about a wide range of topics. Eleanor Ellie Finch, a girl from his science class, was the first to sit with him at lunch. "I hope you don't mind," she said, placing her tray across from him. "I've been meaning to ask you about that lab experiment from last week." Soon, other students joined them. Arthur Art Bell from his English class, Penelope Penny Davies from gym, Samuel Sam Green from math. They formed an unusual group of friends, united not by social status or shared interests, but by their mutual respect for someone who had stood up to the school's biggest bullies and won. Barney's grandmother called him that weekend, and somehow she knew without being told what had happened. "You used the gift," she said, her voice carrying a mix of pride and concern. "I had to," Barney replied. "They were humiliating me, recording it to show everyone. I couldn't let them—" "I know, dear," she interrupted gently. "Sometimes the universe puts us in situations where we must choose between our principles and our survival. The important thing is what you do afterward." "Their hair is growing back," Barney confessed. "Slowly, but it's growing." His grandmother chuckled. "Good. That means you remembered the most important lesson. Power without compassion is just cruelty. You could have made it permanent, couldn't you?" Barney nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Yes. But you didn't. That's the difference between a hedge witch and a dark sorcerer, between a healer and someone who causes harm. You used only as much power as needed to protect yourself, and no more." As the weeks passed, Oakhaven settled into a new balance. Rex and his buddies kept to themselves, their former reign of terror effectively over. They weren't cruel to other students anymore. Whether out of fear of retaliation or genuine change of heart, Barney wasn't sure, but the result was the same. Other students who had been targets of bullying before found their tormentors suddenly less interested in causing trouble. Word had spread through the school's grapevine that there were consequences for cruelty, that the new kid possessed something that made crossing him unwise. Barney found himself in an odd position, respected but not feared, admired but not worshipped. He used his newfound influence carefully, never threatening anyone directly, but making it clear through his actions and presence that he stood with the underdogs, the outcasts, the students who needed protection. The science lab where everything had changed became Barney's favorite place in the school. Mr. Harrison, who had been away during the incident, never knew exactly what had happened there, but he noticed that his students seemed more respectful to one another, more careful with their words and actions. One afternoon, as Barney worked alone on an extra credit project after school, Rex appeared in the doorway. Barney looked up calmly, feeling no fear this time. Rex's hair had grown back to about a half-inch in length, making him look younger and less intimidating than before. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, fidgeting with his hands. Can I talk to you?" Rex asked quietly. Barney nodded, gesturing to a stool across from his lab table. Rex sat down, staring at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said finally, "for what I did to you, for how I treated you. It was wrong." Barney waited, saying nothing. "I don't understand what happened that day," Rex went on. "I don't understand how you did what you did, and honestly, I don't want to know. But I've been thinking about it a lot, about why I picked on you in the first place." He looked up at Barney for the first time since sitting down. I think I was jealous of you. You were different, and you didn't seem to care what anyone thought, and that intimidated me. I've spent so much time trying to fit in, trying to be what everyone expected me to be, that when I saw someone who didn't need that, I didn't know how to deal with it." Barney considered this for a moment. "You made my life miserable for weeks," he said quietly. "You humiliated me in front of the entire school." "I know," Rex said, his voice barely audible. "I know, and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect us to be friends. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was." Barney studied Rex's face, looking for signs of dishonesty or manipulation, but saw only genuine regret and fear. This wasn't the confident, cruel boy who had tormented him. This was someone who had been fundamentally changed by experiencing powerlessness for the first time in his life. "Your hair is growing back," Barney pointed out. Rex's hand went instinctively to his head. "Yeah," slowly. "The doctors don't understand what caused it. They keep running tests, but everything comes back normal." "Maybe," Barney said carefully, "it's growing back because you're learning to be a better person." Rex's eyes widened slightly. "Does that mean, can you control it, whether it grows back or not?" Barney smiled mysteriously. "What do you think?" Rex was quiet for a long moment. "I think," he said finally, "that I never want to find out what happens to people who cross you twice." "Smart," Barney agreed. "But Rex, you don't have to be afraid of me. I'm not interested in revenge or in ruling this school the way you did. I just want to be left alone, to live my life and help people when I can." Rex nodded gratefully. "Thank you," he said, standing to leave. "And Barney, if anyone ever gives you trouble again, if anyone tries to do to you what I did, they'll have to go through me first." Barney was surprised by this offer. "Why?" "Because," Rex said, pausing in the doorway, "I know what it feels like to be powerless now. I know what it feels like to be afraid and humiliated and alone. I never want to make anyone else feel that way again, and I sure as heck don't want to stand by and watch someone else do it." After Rex left, Barney sat alone in the science lab, thinking about his grandmother's words about responsibility and compassion. He had used his gifts to protect himself, and in doing so, he had not only changed his own life, but had apparently changed Rex as well. As the months passed, Oakhaven became a different place. The culture of bullying that had flourished under Rex's influence began to disappear, replaced by something more inclusive and respectful. Students who had been afraid to speak up before found their voices. Those who had been isolated began to form friendships. Barney never revealed the full extent of his abilities to anyone at school, but his reputation as someone not to be messed with remained strong. More importantly, he became known as a protector, someone who would stand up for others who couldn't stand up for themselves. His grandmother visited him that spring, and as they walked through the halls of Oakhaven together, she nodded approvingly at what she saw. The scent of cleaning fluid hung in the air, mixing with the faint aroma of old textbooks. "You have learned the most important lesson," she told him as they sat together in the science lab where everything had changed. "Power is not about what you can do to others. It's about who you choose to become when you have the ability to make a difference." Barney looked around the lab, remembering that awful afternoon when 3 bullies had tried to humiliate him, and how their cruelty had awakened something inside him that changed everything. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights filled the room. "I used to think the hardest part would be learning to control the gift," he said to his grandmother. "But the hardest part is knowing when to use it and when to show restraint." She smiled at him, her eyes twinkling with pride. "That, dear, is why the gift chose you. Not everyone who has the power also has the wisdom to use it well." As his senior year approached, Barney reflected on how much had changed since that November afternoon. He had friends now, real friends who valued him for who he was rather than what he could do to their enemies. He had the respect of his classmates and teachers. Most importantly, he had learned that true strength wasn't about the power to destroy, but about the wisdom to know when to fight and when to forgive. Rex kept his word, becoming an unlikely ally who used his social standing to protect other vulnerable students. Butch and Spike, shaken by their experience, had become quieter, more thoughtful versions of themselves. The 3 of them never spoke directly about what had happened in the science lab, but the memory of that afternoon hung over them like a constant reminder of the consequences of cruelty. On graduation day, as Barney walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he caught sight of Rex in the audience, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Their eyes met for a moment, and Rex nodded, a gesture of respect and gratitude that spoke volumes. The scent of freshly cut flowers filled the air. Barney nodded back, understanding that sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying your enemies, but transforming them into better people. His grandmother had been right all along. True power lay not in what you could take from others, but in what you could help them become. As he looked out at his classmates and teachers, at the school that had once felt like a battlefield, but had become a community, Barney knew that he had learned something far more valuable than any lesson from a textbook. He had learned that standing up for yourself didn't require becoming someone you weren't proud of, and that the strongest magic of all was the transformation that happened when someone chose to use their power to protect rather than to harm. The sounds of cheering and applause echoed around him. The quiet kid who had once sat alone near the dusty window of the history room was gone, replaced by a young man who understood both his strength and his responsibility. And as he stepped into his future, Barney carried with him the knowledge that true victory wasn't about making others fall. It was about helping everyone rise. The warm sun shone down on him, illuminating his path forward. Character count 3598.